Welcome everybody to the State-Proof Stoic. You've got me in the house tonight, and obviously she needs no introduction. She can do her own introductions.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. It's Juno Harley. I'm sure a lot of you know me.
We sure do. And by God, we have a shitstorm on Twitter on our hands today. People really don't like liberty and freedom. God forbid we made a suggestion that everyone should have a choice whether to get forcefully vaccinated. And I just made a comment to say people that love forced vaccinations hate liberty and personal choice. And yeah, I got character assassinated. I even got Bianca von Wyk. So yeah, it was a good nuclear shitstorm, and just a testament that becoming state-proof is one of the best things you can do for yourself and for your family, because you've got lunatics like that out there that don't think you should have personal choice or personal liberties. So that is exactly what we are contending with. So that's the way of the world, and that's currently how it's going. Dr. DNA, would you like to tell about your experience today on Twitter before we get warmed up and started?
Sure. Okay, well, first of all, that was completely unintentional. I actually just thought I was making a comparison between what happened during the Holocaust, and it was not equating that with what's now happening with the vaccines and people who are trying to force people who won't take the vaccine out of society. I wasn't trying to make the comparison that it's exactly like the Holocaust. I was actually trying to make a comment about the nature of evil and the nature of tyranny. And well, it escalated quite fast is all I can say. And a lot of people just misinterpreted what I was saying. And I was trying to actually address that. And I mean, I don't often do this. I don't often actually just fire back throughout the day. But it was one of those times where I was like, yeah, I'm not going to back down, because really you're just being purposefully obtuse if you can't see the kind of point I'm trying to make. So yeah, no, it's escalated pretty fast, and yeah, we'll play that out.
Okay, do you mind actually reading the tweet? Because you just quoted on it, and actually I think giving a bit of context, as you would say, always makes a lot of sense. So if you don't mind pulling up that tweet and let me know when you're ready, and then you can start firing it. But yeah, I'll give you a minute or two. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. We just wanted to get a bit of banter going on at the beginning of this show. Again, just kind of gauge where the world is at this stage. And you've got the lunatics on the left, the leftists, trying to tell everyone that they have to get vaccinated for their own good and for humanity. And you've got people that are genuinely concerned about everything that's happening, all the counter evidence, all the other stuff, and the big censorship that's happening. And anything that's contrary to what the leftists say is must be censored, and the other side is wrong. And I'm just like, everyone can make a choice. Give everyone a choice. Don't censor people. Make your own choices. Be an adult. And they don't really like that sentiment. Are you on that tweet?
Yeah, I've got it. So this is the thread. In 1961, the trial of Adolf Eichmann began in Israel. He was the administrator responsible for coordinating all the moving parts of getting the Jews to the concentration camps. Hannah Arendt, a philosopher, was at the trial and wrote a book about what she called the banality of evil. Given what Eichmann had done, everyone expected an explicitly evil persona, someone who enjoyed the power of making others suffer. But psychologists found nothing of the sort. He was completely ordinary and seemed to sincerely believe that he was just doing his job well, which was the right thing to do. This example revealed that evil need not be that Machiavellian to still be a form of evil. Why am I bringing this up? With all the vaccine supporters calling for the exclusion of those who aren't vaccinated from society, we are once again witnessing the banality of evil. They think they are doing the right thing, acting for the greater good, but refuse to see the bigger picture in which they are evil because they are embracing tyranny and enabling it. We must not give in. Yeah, that escalated very fast.
Well, in a very apt point. And it makes a lot of sense where it tells us exactly where we are right about now. Okay. So obviously I started White Noise a while back and kind of focused more on more recently on the State-Proof Stoic, on becoming more state-proof and self-sustainable, of self-sufficient, how people can find ways to be more self-sufficient, less reliant on the state and the current supply chains that we find ourselves, I could use the word enslaved to, or we're addicted to convenience, and I'll cover that in a bit. With everything happening right and about now, bad policies and everything, you'll see an escalation in prices as we have. Everything's getting more expensive. Now, the person that had a home garden or were growing their own food, or producing their own food one way or the other, would have had a buffer against this. The people that don't have gardens and not interested in growing their own food or buying it locally from farmers or a farmer's market definitely felt a lot of pain more recently. And then you also had the riots in KZN, and that also affected prices across the board. Obviously, that's a supply and demand issue, basic economics also, that the leftists don't understand quite well. So all of this and what happened in the last, I'd say, year or so has pushed me and personally some other people to actually look at other ways to live and how we can become more self-sufficient. And that's why the conversion to State-Proof Stoic started, to help other people on this journey. And it's been an interesting journey. I've moved out of the city myself. I have found a place on a farm where I can actually grow some food. I'm paying $2.5 grand rent a month and living the good life. I also went out of the formal job market. I started as a freelancer, and I've been freelancing all this time. Started a PTY, and everything and every rand that I make, it's paid into the PTY, and I pay myself a salary accordingly. I've also started chopping wood, planting food, getting seedlings ready to grow my own food. And there's many more things that I want to do. But I just thought I'd start at the beginning, right? So you want to become state-proof. Where do you begin? Everyone has to find their own why. Why do you want to do it? Is it because you don't like the state's authoritarian hand? Is it because your levies are too high? Is it because you're paying too much rent in the cities? Is the quality of life shit? Do you want to have something better for yourself and your family? Do you not want to be a victim of inflation? Everyone needs to find their why and their reason. Mine primarily was I hate authoritarian government. I hate the escalating levies. I hate the I would say the lack of service delivery in our metros. I hate fucking potholes. Spoiler alert, there are potholes here a lot. But I also hated I saw the whole push for vaccination at the work coming. I saw the whole push for mandatory vaccinations, and also the mask mandate, which I also sincerely hate. And I just decided I won't be part of it. And I wanted to get away from that whole authoritarian bandwagon and build something that I have a bit more agency over and have a life where I've got a lot more agency over. And that's kind of where I started. And then, Dr. Dionne, anything you wish to add to moving out of the city and living the good life?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always lived in the city. I think the first time I actually experienced an environment that wasn't as urban was in Canada, because I lived in a very small city. It was more like a town, and we actually lived in the midst of a forest right by a river. And it was, in that sense, one of the best things I've ever experienced was being that close to nature. And then coming from that, coming back to Joburg in South Africa was quite a shock to the system. And then after working there for many years and starting a new career path, I also realized that it's not something I want anymore. And if an option ever presented itself where I could move out of the city, and I could actually still have the career and still do that remote working thing, which I believe that's the only good thing that's come out of COVID is companies being forced to embrace remote work, which has given people who can do remote work a lot more options. And I think that's been a good thing, probably the only good thing that's come out of it. And and then when we were presented with this opportunity of living in a rural setting for so little rent, in a beautiful environment on a farm, I decided, this is my one opportunity to actually see what this will be like. And I was scared at first because I'd always lived in a city where everything was 5 minutes away. And that convenience was always just, such a big part of my daily existence. But I have to say, like, coming to an environment where, it's not as convenient. So it takes a bit more effort to get to a place where you can buy the stuff you need. But at the same time, everything we need is still on our doorstep. But for the most part, we live in the middle of nowhere. And it's been a rejuvenating experience, unlike anything else I've ever known. Now I still have to go back to Joburg once a month for a week for my job. And having just done it, I'm so happy that I moved into a rural setting because, wow, it makes such a big difference. It's unbelievable. And you still have everything that you need if you choose your location carefully enough. You still have everything that you need, but you have all the benefits of none of that traffic, noise. So if you're a PTSD person, boy, this setting will help you. And I suffer from anxiety and fibromyalgia, so it's actually a pretty big deal. So
Okay, that's a good why, I would say. Lots of good reasons, and I'll touch a bit on those in a bit more detail later. Then the when. When are you going? Are you going this month, next month, and whenever? For people not used to the rural areas, I'd say go stay with a friend for a bit if you can, preferably one that has a bit of bandwidth if your company allows for a bit of flexibility. Go check out the rural areas first before you go there, and then decide when your when will be. Is it a year? Is it 6 months? Is it 4 months? And then make a concise decision. The where. Obviously, you and I mentioned a couple of interesting things here. You need to ask yourself what you're comfortable with. Do you have a family? Do you need to have good schools nearby if you've got children? All of these things will play a factor in where you go and what your limitations are. We're at Bethlehem, so we've got a couple of cool, interesting options. There are quite a few good schools in the area, good restaurants, good shops. You've got Clarence nearby. You've got Golden Gate, you've got mountains, you've got scenic views, you've got a lot of things to work with. So location-wise, it's quite nice. It's relatively close to Joburg, about a 3 hours drive. Manzimtoti is about 4 hours drive. So Coast is about, just a bit under 3.5, 4 hours, depending on who you ask or how fast you drive. So the way is also very important. And then with whom? Are you going with your family? Are you actually going with a few friends? In some cases, you might find that some of the places you get in rural areas, there might be more than one house. So you can actually maybe go as a community as well. So you've got options there when it comes to with whom you're going. You just need to find a setup that works for you. And then obviously you can just take it from there. Then how much? How much are you willing to invest? How much are you willing to pay a month? You will find that the actual cost of living is quite low in the rural areas, especially if you are starting your own food production. You will find that everything becomes much cheaper with time because you're actually producing your own food. You're less reliant on the supply chains and the government's whims or supply chain issues. That doesn't influence you anymore because you've got chickens, you've got some cattle maybe. So you also have vegetables. You might have fruit trees already there. So there might be some trees already on the farm where you're going. So you actually might have some food production ready. You just maybe have to tend to it a bit. So we also found that there was quite a few fruit trees here. I now have to buy a saw and actually get them up into production and also feed them. But come summer, they will actually produce a lot of fruit if I look after them. So those are also things to consider. Then also what buildings, if you're going to keep chickens, if you're going to have some cattle, is the infrastructure there? Do you actually have to contribute to it? Can you make a deal with the people already there, right? Can you actually do a 50-50 split on something? I want chickens, you want chickens. Can we actually split this deal? So if I want to have a hydroponic, aeroponic, or a chicken coop, how are we going to do it? You can actually repurpose some of the buildings that's already there if they're a bit older. That might actually work you out cheaper, or you might come in with, let's say, lighter building materials and actually start building stuff from scratch, just depending on how much you're willing to spend, right? Something to consider, what I kind of found initially difficult, is how to earn. So I have my side hustle that, well, my primary hustle is now my remote work, right? But also consider maybe doing something if you have a surplus, right? Whether it's eggs, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruit. If you grow some microgreens, I'm close to Clarence, so in theory, I am looking at growing some microgreens and producing some niche vegetables to the restaurants in Clarence that they don't get at the local supermarket. So I'm looking at producing stuff for myself because I'm a big foodie myself, and then asking the chefs, what do they want that they can't get anywhere here? And then I'm producing a surplus. Then you can go a bit deeper, right? So how do I earn? Again, you actually take, for instance, your basil, you make basil pesto. You can start growing mushrooms. Also something I do myself looking into is actually growing some mushrooms, medicinal, and obviously the gourmet mushroom is more for eating. And then just touching on that again, what livestock, what crops? Livestock is an interesting thing. If you have surplus food scraps, you can feed it to your chickens, you can feed it to pigs. Pigs actually plow your land. If you take your camp and you rotate it, pigs can actually clear your land for you, and they can also plow it for you. Same with chickens. They also clear land relatively quickly. So actually using animals to your advantage to clear up land for gardening or whatever the case might be is a great idea. And then you can also use their excrement as compost and put it into your compost heap. So there are multi-purposes for animals. And then I'm just touching on the crops again. Yeah, if you have good grassland like we have here, you might not even have to plant any feed for your livestock because you might just get it from the land. But also look at planting some stuff for your livestock, right? Then I'm just going to touch on, okay, I already answered the whole school thing with the why. And then also, like, why get out of the cities? What's happening at the cities? Well, there are a few things happening. We've got a rising crime as joblessness go up. That's escalating. You've got failing infrastructure. Electricity was first. Water is becoming a more rampant infrastructure failing we are seeing in the cities. And then also no service delivery. We've got trash everywhere in some suburbs, no trash collection, and just lack of services in general. And that's one of the reasons why we also decided to get out. And also then the expenses, right? Because the municipalities are just piling on to the expenses, but they're not delivering a better service. So that's one of the reasons I left, is I don't want to contribute to that and pay these miserable bastards anything more than I need to. Another reason is enforcement is quite high in the cities, right? So you've got police on the streets enforcing the law. These laws are unjust. They will probably get more authoritarian as time goes on. And people in the city get the heavy end of the stick, unfortunately, because enforcement is relatively high. Yeah, let's be fair. In rural areas, you might have a bit more trouble with security, or there might be a higher risk of plaasaanval and stuff like that. But if you and your partner are armed and you've got dogs around you and the people you're living with in the same yard are also armed, that's a hell of a lot of mitigation. And then you can also add a bit of beams, and you can add a bit of interesting technology to that as well for protection. So that's one of the reasons we got out of the cities as well. Then I just want to touch on the cost of convenience. Speaking kind of where we are right about now, how did we get here? I think one of the bad things that has happened to us is the addiction to convenience. We can go to a shop, get relatively anything at any time. We don't have to be skilled in anything to work with our hands anymore, because God forbid we've got Take-A-Lot and all these other services, and we can get everything in a whim. So what happened in time is our addiction to convenience and instant gratification has forced us to actually become less well off and less well sufficient. I look at my father's generation, they had orchards for days. This was all torn down because they didn't need it anymore, because they got these nice shops. And my grandfather, on the other hand, they planted these orchards. They had big gardens. They had lots of livestock. They didn't go to shops for things. They had most of the things they needed and only went to the shops when they really, really, really had to. And that's the difference. So we've become addicted to convenience. And I think that is really not a good place to be at. And that's kind of where we find ourselves now. Not everyone can work with their hands. Few people know anything about electricity, plumbing, or the basics to run a homestead. And we need to revive those skills again and get more skillful with our hands, be able to fix things and not just return things when they malfunction or break. And that's kind of one of the missions that we have to do. And one of the things we have to focus on is creating a skilled community of competent people, and also bringing competent people in to share their skills. And that's also what this movement is about for me, is actually getting people skilled up so they can actually tend to their own affairs, and only get external people in if they really need to, and service providers. Touching on that as well, the addiction to convenience is also the complete reliance on the supply chains. As I mentioned earlier in this chat, if there's a rise in inflation, if there are trucks burning down, if there are riots, you at the end of the day, consumer, pay the price. If there are petrol hikes, all of these things have a notable effect, and it affects all of us, and it affects your pocket at the end of the day. What are you currently doing to mitigate that? Most of us, nothing. I want to change that, and I would really want to get it started. Dr. Dionne, do you want to say something? I can see you are noting a lot of things right about now.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I think that for a lot of people, the riots were a big wake-up call. Where in a lot of cities you couldn't get basic necessities, you couldn't buy bread, and if you could, you had to stand in a queue for days on end. And I think what struck me a lot about that, we were actually planning to go to Joburg at the time to see my sister, and we eventually cancelled. But I think what struck me about that time was that we didn't feel the effects of it at all. I mean, so we were here in Bethlehem, and I was thinking, there's going to be a ripple effect, and eventually these riots are going to hit us, and they didn't. Like in a rural community, it seems like people are a lot more practical, and they were just kind of getting on with it. And I was really surprised that it was very calm. There was nothing going on. And we were hearing about all these dreadful events in Durban and Gauteng, and it was awful, but at least we actually felt safer here, which I didn't anticipate. Because again, coming from the city and with all the farm attacks and everything, you imagine that moving to a rural setting is a big risk, and there's a big safety risk there. But when we moved here, we actually asked, so we're living on a farm, and we asked the people that we know here, and we asked our landlords, like what's the crime rate like how much crime do you guys have here, what have you experienced? And generally the answer was nothing. They don't really experience crime. So I think that it does depend on the area that you select, and so that's going to make all the difference. Is where are you going, and have you done your research to make sure that you're not putting yourself and your loved ones at unnecessary risk. And of course, yes, a part of that is arming yourself and learning how to use a firearm, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now, is figuring out how to keep ourselves safe no matter what happens. But I think it's important to dispel this myth that if you're in a rural setting, you're necessarily at greater risk, because clearly that's not the case. I actually felt less safe in Joburg than I do here. And I'm on a farm. And the security settings are actually quite good, because we literally have dogs on the property. and they work better than any alarm system because they never malfunction. And if anything happens, they bark, and we know about it. So in fact, I actually feel safer here than I did in Joburg, where I had an alarm system and all of those things. So I think that should also help people to make better decisions about where they go into a rural setting, and that they don't have to fear necessarily that it's going to be like all these farm murders we hear about. So yeah.
Okay, that's a very hot take. So basically, in a nutshell. Oh, sorry. Are you muted? Sorry, we were just playing mute roulette there, and it's always fun. So basically, good points made. Find out if your area is safe. If your area doesn't have a lot of people, it's not a pathway through an area that's densely populated. We're very, very out of, we're 60 kilometers outside of the town. You've got a few people living on the farms and on the road, but they mostly work for the local farmers in the area. So you don't have a lot of strangers in the area, and the people here are generally very good natured. They wave, they are friendly. You've got a sense of community. We drive them to town. It's a very good vibe. The energy is quite good. You don't see these in Joburg. Sometimes you'll run past someone and they'll just give you this iron stare. You'll greet them and they just like, you know how Joburg people are. It's quite something. Get that death stare. So I'm just continuing from my previous point then. So the cost of convenience, we were at, we covered point 1 and 2, addiction to convenience, the complete reliance on supply chains. And then I'm touching on a third one, the effect of being addicted to convenience. And this is something I see quite a lot, is that it kills competence. A lot of people, like, again, your fathers and grandfathers used to fix everything. They never throw something away per se. They'll repurpose it or they'll fix it. Again, our addiction to convenience has taken away that. If something doesn't work, we throw it into the trash can with no thought of how can I use this? How can I recycle this? I don't want to sound like a hippie, but if you're living out in a place without garbage disposal, it is a great idea to actually recycle. And you can actually use that money that you gain from recycling to actually fund your infrastructure or building materials, or fucking buy plant seeds or cattle with it. So it's a great idea to recycle, because at the end of the day, you really want to burn the stuff that you cannot recycle and take all the other materials, either repurpose it or take it back and get some cash monies for it. So it really adds up, especially if you're 2 or more people or a family. You can greatly reduce your waste on the farm because you actually have your own landfill, etc., or you burn the shit out of that trash. And the rest of the stuff you can actually use, you actually reuse or repurpose. Then on the bigger theme, just I'm going to touch on this very quick, is the West has outsourced its crafts and skills to China. We all know this. Everything is made on China. When a place like the USA, they basically, just like South Africa, implemented very hostile labor laws, and the unions have taken over. So the willingness to actually produce locally is no longer there. We have basically, by labor legislation, outsourced everything to China. And the competencies and the skills for these things are dying. There are very few people left that are actually skilled enough, and they are getting very old people to come back and actually come and teach people how to do things that they used to do when they were much younger. So these skills are coming back. You do get shoe manufacturers and the odd new things that are made by hand popping up left, right, and center, because we don't want to be reliant on China for all our product. We actually have to create resilient communities that can actually produce some basic goods, and then look to communities to actually combine resources to do this. Orania is a very good example. So they get a lot of flack from the mainstream media. I think they're fucking awesome. They were the first guys that gave the middle finger to the state, I think relatively in Verwoerd's time. And they just went on their own way, and they've got this whole self-sufficient attitude, and they actually created a lot of industry, and they've got a lot of products that they manufacture there. So I want to see more of that type of communities popping up that actually do either manufacture or create things of value, and then barter among each other, which is actually good, because your different areas will be able to produce different produce and different things. Also, what's closed that gap is the fact that we've got greenhouses, and we can also change our environments regarding heat and humidity. So you can have a tent that grows tropical plants on a farm in the Free State. That's the game changer, and we've got that technology, and it's not that expensive anymore. So moving along from that, so that was the West that outsourced their skills. Quality of goods in decline the last decade. Obviously, we all know that things are very of shitty quality. Have you ever bought? I don't hope anyone here buys from Wish. It's terrible. I've never bought it. I've heard stories. But even on one day only, you buy something and 2 weeks later, that shit breaks. Terrible build quality. So again, going on that whole thing that stuff isn't being built anymore to last. It breaks easily. So my philosophy is rather pay more and buy something that lasts much longer than buying shit that breaks easily, or build stuff yourself that actually lasts and stand the test of time, instead of, like, again, it's that instant gratification. We want everything at a low price point, and we want that, we're addicted to that shit. And I'm saying no to that. Buy stuff that lasts longer, that's more resilient and can take a bit of a beating and doesn't break when you touch it, or use it for a week. That's not on. Shout out to trades and crafts. The people that are involved in it, people that can work with leather, people that can work with wood, people that can do plumbing, people that can mount, build a pizza oven, for God's sakes. All those kind of skills, lay a brick. That skills really come in handy when you alone on a homestead. The expenses of getting external professionals in to do all these things for you is enormous. So you have to get to a point where you actually start doing little projects, to skill yourself up, upskill in different domains. Over the weekends, go work with a friend that's a contractor. Go work with someone that's a plumber. Go work with someone that's a butcher. Learn to butcher. Learn all these skills, because you are going to need it. And we need more of it. And then in these communities, we need to actually do a bit of skill transfer. Dune is clapping her fingers, so let's hear what she has to say.
I mean, look, I'm coming at this from a different perspective, but I think it's a worthwhile one to just support this ideal of self-sufficiency. And I think one of the respects in which I would adamantly agree is that degrees are overrated, especially now. And I'm someone who's a knowledge worker, but I've also worked in education for long enough to know that what they're doing is brainwashing, and these degrees mean nothing. They're literally just handing them out. You pay the fee, they give you the degree. And that's not skill. It's not competency. It's a piece of paper. It's very sad, because it means that every person in the past who actually got their degree legitimately and actually earned it and got the skills and capabilities are now being questioned, because businesses are realizing they're hiring all these graduates and they're not getting anything in return for it. So I think that, yes, absolutely, craftsmen, apprenticeships, I would say the technical colleges, but the government's technical colleges are so behind in terms of the industries that it's actually an embarrassment. So actually my advice to a lot of young people is to not look to degrees as a solution to any kind of problem, because inevitably it isn't, unless you want to be something highly technical, like a lawyer, a doctor. Sure, yeah, then you're going to need a degree. Whether it's good or bad, we can do a whole nother episode on that. But in my opinion, if you actually want to just do something that matters and actually makes a difference to people and actually gives you a good living, I wouldn't go to a university degree, because I think at this point it's absolutely meaningless. I would actually encourage young people to look to apprenticeships and become craftsmen, whether you're an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter or a million other things, but it's going to bring you a lot more joy and satisfaction than most university degrees will. So I would definitely support that. The other thing I wanted to actually mention is that it's something Carter and I have talked about a lot, is this idea that sustainability has been co-opted by the left as a leftist value. And so when you talk about sustainability, it's immediately like, oh, you're a leftist. And I think that that's strange, because I think that if you think about what sustainability means, it's actually a form of efficiency. It's actually a form of longevity that's going to actually benefit whatever system it is that you're creating. So it's odd to me that we've allowed the left to co-opt this term as something belonging to them, because in fact, a lot of the genuine conservatives or libertarians or people who are actually trying to create real solutions in the world are also engaging in that. And I wouldn't necessarily call them leftists. So, you know, people who engage in permaculture and essentially a systemic way of thinking to solve problems, knowing that this is a long-term solution, it's not just a short-term solution. For me, that is part of actually being a productive member of society. So I think we really need to question this idea that sustainability is a leftist value, because in my opinion, it really isn't. They've co-opted it for their own purposes, but that's to be expected. And I think that people who are not of that political persuasion need to reclaim it and show that it really isn't. It's about competency and skill and self-sufficiency, and those things are not leftist values, in my opinion, because most of the leftists I look at are not self-sufficient at all. So yeah, we need to actually push back on that.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Most leftists cannot dive a bagel out of a dustbin, so or grow their own food. They just go to Whole Foods and buy vegetables and stuff that last a week in their refrigerator, and it's not that nutrient dense and it goes off relatively quickly. So just to then, that's the cost of convenience. I just wanted to cover that section, and then the next section I want to cover is the local and the remote economy. So the point of this is we're seeing a mass, this is international, this is not just in South Africa, we're seeing a mass exodus of people from the cities to get a better quality of life in rural areas and small towns, and get a better quality of life, in some cases even better schools, all around better quality of life, and that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And we are basically no longer tethered to the cities for higher incomes and opportunities. The remote economy has enabled us to stay anywhere and then have a great time. And what I also tell people as well is you don't have to do this overnight. You can even go and you can maybe do a switch with someone from a rural area so they can stay in your house for a month and you guys go to the rural area if possible. You can also go and stay with a friend in a rural area for a few months and maybe rent your place out. That's also an option. So you don't have to go in face first. You can really do this in a very, very, very systematic way and check it out and see if it is for you. Then I want to touch on the first point in the local and the remote economy is generate revenue for your holding. Obviously, you're going to, if you are bundling down and you decide on a space, maybe you and your friends get a plot, you put 4 houses up. This can be containers. These can be prefab housing. They are amazing these days. I'll actually have a whole episode about that, where it's a complete house, it's completely insulated, electricity, solar panels, water system, water catchment systems, and these start at about 150,000 rand. And then depending on the space, you can obviously add more rooms, add a few more facilities, and have these fully furnished once you get there. So you have to think how you're going to generate revenue. Are you going to go on a completely remote drive, or you do remote work? If you don't have that yet, is look for local opportunities. Ask yourself what skills you want to acquire. If you want to get into woodwork, go work maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Go work at a carpenter. Go work with an electrician. Go work with someone that does construction work. Do those kind of jobs to actually acquire the skills, and then do your remote work when they actually are there. In some cases, have classes that are 1 day long and sometimes 2 days, and others that are 4 days long or 5 days. But I have gaps in my calendar, so I have to be smart about how am I investing my time. So I use a lot of that time to obviously study in my profession to get more certified, and obviously being more certified means I get more money per hour or per day as I'm training other people. But now I'm also having some days where my calendar is completely open. So I can either do work on the homestead, or I can decide to actually go an apprentice at any one of the trades, which is a great idea, and actually get skilled up that way. Then you can also see local opportunities, what you want to do, right? Do you want to grow mushrooms? Do you want to grow very, very nice greens locally that's not available in the superstores, in the stores. So what I usually say is plant stuff that you cannot get in the stores. Don't be a dumb dipshit and plant stuff and sell stuff that's available in the stores. You're not going to make money. Do stuff that are very well, that are nice, that are different, that taste better, that lasts longer, and then go to start at farmers markets. Go to your local, get your local paper, and all the small towns have a local paper. See what the markets are like, what the opportunities, what are the community up to, what do the community like? Do a needs analysis, talk to people, and quickly you'll find niches in there. And then either you might already have the skills, or you could do a bit of YouTubing and a bit of reading and actually level yourself up to a level that you can actually generate a nice income. So that's to generate revenue for your holding part. So you and your partner can either team up, or you can have individual pursuits, and you can do quite a few things. I want to start brewing. I want to start making my own wine. In this area, there's a lot of apples, and I can get apples on the cheap from the farmers directly. They are the apples. They don't look nice in the stores. You buy them on the cheap. You start making apple cider. You start making apple cider vinegar. So you have to look what's locally abundant in your area that you can actually produce into something of value. So that's always important, to look what is abundant in your area, and then see if you can process it one step and then actually make a product out of it that you can sell locally, and actually make some money. And then obviously you can distill and make some mampur or spirits or vodka as well. So there's lots of options there. And you can also grow some cannabis. I mean, the world's your oyster, right? So then I also want to add to that. So that's generating value for your holding. The next point I want to make is global opportunities. I am looking at getting into the European market with my training. I'm looking at actually traveling to Europe and looking for some opportunities there, and maybe having a second holding that I trade with, and then I can actually establish a trade route. You're no longer tethered to just the national economy. You can actually start trading internationally. Even if you have something like an Airbnb, you can start attracting an international market if you market it right with the right platforms. So we are no longer just an economy of local. We must stop thinking local. Get those euros in, get those dollars in. Dollars maybe not so much, because America is printing a buttload of money at this stage. So maybe euros or pounds. And Juna is kicking at me, which always means she has something to say, like all women. So let's give her a chance.
Yeah, I know, us women could never shut up. One of the things I'd like to talk about, though, is that Carter and I have had this debate quite a lot, and we don't agree, but, you know, it's how it goes. But I think one of the strengths of self-sufficiency is that you are not at the mercy of not just your own government, but any government. So I've actually lived in other countries, and I've been exceedingly unhappy in these other countries, which is exactly why I came home. And it was also when everyone told me I was crazy for coming back to South Africa, when I did have the option of getting a worker's visa and eventually seeking permanent residency in these other countries. But these other countries were exceedingly socialist, not unlike ours. Ours is also exceedingly socialist, but the one benefit we have is that our government is so incompetent, they can't enforce most of what they set out to do. So there's so many loopholes. So for South Africans, in almost every way, there's still a lot of freedoms, especially in terms of speech. There's a lot we can say that I know it doesn't sound that way in our country, but if you've lived overseas and you've lived in countries like England and Canada, you'll know we actually have way more freedoms. And so this made me question the entire notion of leaving this country to find a better future somewhere else. Because it made me start thinking that, well, why can't you create, if you actually believe in self-sufficiency, why can't you create something that's self-sufficient in this country? And then you will not be subject to the whims of other countries. Because in Canada, for example, in a lot of ways, while I was there, so I arrived there in 2013, they were quite centrist. So I was told by many Canadians that their elections are not like the US elections, where it's very clearly a left or a right-leaning kind of thing. It's pretty much centrist. Most of their parties are leaning towards the middle. So it's not such a drastic change until Trudeau came, and that was the election that I was there for is when Trudeau was elected into power. And very suddenly everything shifted way to the left. And that was when I decided to leave academia. And so any country that you look at to move to, which I think for a lot of South Africans right now is sounding very appealing, immigrate. But there's so many countries that you could look at now and go, wow, these countries look great. That's what a lot of people thought about New Zealand and Australia. And then they moved there. And then this vaccine shit happened. And now there's essentially an authoritarian state. They didn't anticipate that. They didn't think that would happen, and it did. And the point of this is that you really have no idea how quickly a country can shift. It can happen overnight. I mean, no one thought that Trump would win, and he did. And everything shifted. So whether you agree with that or not, that's not the point. The point is that looking to other countries as a solution to your problem, it is very likely that it is not. Because at the end of the day, you're a South African, and I can tell you, there's no country in the world that's like this country. There are no people in the world that's like us. We are very different in every way. So in my opinion, the best solution is to seek self-sufficiency in this country, is to create an enclave for yourself, a community like Orania, which, by the way, when you go there, it feels like you're literally like 40 years ago. It's so safe. Like they have picket fences, they have no security whatsoever. It is literally like, it is just, and as many people say, oh, it's racist. It really isn't. Like their only condition is that you actually adhere to their cultural values. So basically, you speak Afrikaans, you adhere to Afrikaans values, and then you can be any color you like. They don't give a shit about that. So that's also just, the race penders that just want to perpetuate that shit. So in my opinion, self-sufficiency in this country is the solution for most of us if we choose to accept this mission.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, there is a lot to be said about the self-sufficiency and the resilience of rural people. And I just want to add to that you can actually ask the people locally what they are doing, what works and doesn't work in the area as well, to get some local wisdom. And yeah, Orania gets about a lot of nonsense and a lot of bad media coverage, but we all know what our mainstream media is like, Adrian Basson et al. So I won't delve too much into that. To continue this trade, better quality of life. You can go run in the mornings on a dirt road. You can run in the fields. You can walk whenever you want. You don't have to look at your back when you're taking a little walk. You don't have to worry about someone coming on the edge a bit quickly. All of that worries and that little PTSD that we have from the cities are exactly gone. We pay $2,500 a month to get water, electricity, and internet. Now, do you know, it might sound a bit shitty because he's got a dinosaur of an old machine she's using now, and we've got a thick wall. But in this weekend, I'm pulling in a few cables and putting a bit of access points around the house to have a bit better experience with the internet. But the lines are actually good, and that's going to be my next topic, is actually internet in rural South Africa. So where we are at, we've got full LTE. It could be better with a signal booster. And we've got what you call WISPs. They are wireless internet server providers, basically beaming fiber across the platteland, which means basically they've got high sites. They put a little radio up. That radio has a cable into a router. That tower then looks at the next tower, and that signal might hop once or twice into an actual fiber relay. So the internet is quite good. We are streaming Netflix. We've got a 6 meg line here, and we can stream Netflix. We can work. We can have team calls. I just wanted to call that out, that it's not that you don't have internet in the platteland. There are many ways to go about it. So don't be so fixated on your fiber. There are good alternatives, and they're relatively well priced as well. Between 400 to 600 rand, you get a 4 to a 6 meg line. So just for people that if internet is a concern, you can obviously look at that. You don't have to go for shitty satellite internet with high latency. You can also, if you already have an existing skill, like I mentioned, doing workshops in the local community of things that people actually care for can actually be good. For instance, I can actually go to schools or to people and actually have Microsoft workshops, technical workshops, train future admins, and I can leverage what I already have. Do you know, for instance, can do um, writing workshops, teach people how to write better, and do any education that you want to that actually links with the local community. So there are local opportunities that you can leverage from. And between the homesteads, you can actually do a lot of workshops. And with the internet, you can actually stream from your place. And then you can also, if the workshop requires something specialized, so if I want to do a mushroom workshop, I can actually send the kits to my constituents and they'll receive it. And then a day or two later, we can have the workshop. So you can get very creative in that regard with creating workshops that actually creates funding. And there are a lot of innovative ways you can start businesses. We've got two postal companies, Postnet and another courier company in town. So it's easy for me to receive parcels and send stuff. We also have a Take-A-Lot center here if you're so inclined to order from Take-A-Lot. And then we've got my cousin that all our big packages and stuff actually goes to them directly. So they are our local pickup points for packages. So find someone you can send stuff to, but you won't be isolated, and it doesn't mean you cannot get goods anymore. Another thing that I really like about staying in a rural area is the digital detox, the markets. There are gun ranges here. There might be archery ranges. I just need to verify that. Um, Clarence has golf courses. There's driving ranges, biking trails, etc. And then you also have the mountain hiking trails. And then also outside of our house, there's so many places we can actually hike to and run that it keeps you busy and it keeps that adventurous spirit going. And I mean, Clarence is just a joel in total, but it doesn't mean you have to go, you're sacrificing something necessarily because you're moving out of the city. If you go to a town that has enough things or just a bit close enough to a bigger city, but you're 20 or 15 kilometers away, you can still have a good quality of life. So you don't have to go to fucking Puff Oder or someplace that's way out of the radar and there literally is nothing. You can actually be relatively close to some places with good services. Um, and then I'm just touching on that again. The recycle part, we actually use recycling as a funding mechanism where you can actually get start recycling goods. So like I say, metals. So if a multi-plug breaks or a fan or a heater breaks, you can strip that open. You can take the copper out, the metals, the lead, whatever that's in there, put it in different bins. The end of the year, every 6 months, you take that, you take the glass, you take all the recycled stuff, and you can actually use that as a funding mechanism for your homestead. And the rest of the stuff that you cannot compost, so again, paper, boxes you can use, you can compost that. Stuff you really cannot, like plastics, some plastics, you want to burn that, but you also want to actually shop at places where you can actually go in with your own containers, ideally, so you're not creating a metric ton of waste. I know that sounds very fucking hippie, but the ideal situation is you go for a zero waste system. And then I'm moving on from there. That was covering the local and remote economy, the rural infrastructure. So as we mentioned, right, we're paying a lot of money in the cities, but we're getting really shit bang for a buck. There's a water pipe leak. We pay hell of a excess. The water pipes are all close to breaking. They're rusty. They're dirty. So we get, in some areas you get pretty damn bad water, and then the water treatment plants are also terrible. Then with electricity, you've got inconsistent electricity. That's going to be across the board. So you have to look at solar, wind, or solar alternative there. And then how do we mitigate that in rural areas? What do we have at our disposal? So what you'll find mostly, you've got boreholes is one of the options with a pump. And then you've got a JoJo tank to actually have it, and then it distributes to multiple houses. Then another option is water catchment. And with the water catchment systems, you can obviously have your roofs catch the water and then put it in the tank. And then you can either use it in the garden, or if you're putting it into your house, some form of filtration will be necessary if you are using the water to drink it. So you can get very creative there. And then obviously on most farms, there are dams. And then you can also use the grey water waste and let that into your garden. You should be fine. Plants do quite well with that. That they won't die, but obviously depends on how much you're letting out. And some plants like let's say perennials that might cover something like grass also might be better. You might not want that in your vegetable garden, but you can use the grey water. With regards to energy, like I mentioned, there's wind, there's solar, and you also have to be cognizant how you are leaching energy. Is your house well isolated? If not, you are going to spend enormous amount of money on heating, central heating, electricity, firewood. The nice thing about rural living is you can have a fireplace and you can have a lot of fire, but you need to make sure that your house is well isolated so you can actually not spend an inordinate amount of money on heating it. And then also with heating water, why use cold water? Have a system that already warms it up, maybe a solar panel or something that the water runs through, and the water is already relatively warm once it comes out of the tap. You have to be innovative and be smart on how you are using your energy and conserving it, and not go balls to the wall. Okay, I see we've got a question here from Proudly Neanderthal. Good for evening, fellow apes. Which province is the safest, and is there internet in rural areas? I covered it a bit earlier. Yes, there is. You get something called WISPs. They've got wireless towers, and they wirelessly distribute fiber from a central point to multiple areas. And they put up a little radio that points to these high sites, and that then connects you in. And we actually have a very good connection here. So you do have internet, and we actually have LTE as well. But in our case, I might recommend having, you can have them set up an amplifier for the signal in your house. And it's kind of like Wi-Fi, but for LTE signal. So yes, Neanderthal, that you can do that. Do you want to add something at this stage? You see you're getting uneasy there.
You know me well. Well, it's not too Proudly Neanderthal's point exactly, I would say, but I suppose one of the things I wanted to mention is that living in a rural space has actually made me realize how much I actually do want to get away from sitting in front of a computer every day. And I think we underestimate the harm that this does to our psyche. And as someone who suffers from mental health issues, I can attest to the fact that for me, living in a rural space has alleviated a lot of the stresses that come into play if you live in an urban space. So there's just a lot of noise, a lot of random sounds, just a general sense of paranoia about your safety. And moving into the space has allowed me to relax enough that I actually kind of get the sense that, wow, I actually want to move beyond just sitting in front of my computer every day and doing a lot more things that are engaged with being self-sufficient, but also just engaged with just the world around me and not just being entrapped by this very narrow space of looking at your computer screen, which I think has done an enormous amount of harm for a lot of us, because I think we invest so much time in our careers or our jobs and we kind of forget about every other part of who we are. And I think for me, that coming to a rural space was the first time I actually reassessed, like, where am I at in my life? Am I the person that I want to be? And in a lot of ways, no, I wasn't, because at the time I was addicted to painkillers. I was essentially in a fog. And my first priority was getting off of that, which I did, which was very painful. But I got through it, and now I actually care about, what is my quality of life like? And I think that making that shift, I'm not saying that all urban environments are crap. There are some urban environments that are not, but I think it also depends on how much money you have and resources at your disposal. For a lot of us, living in an urban environment is very constricting. And I think that moving forward, if we want to have more freedom, if we want to have more independence, if we want to essentially protect ourselves from the government, which is absolutely an authoritarian state at this point, there's no denying it. The rural path is about the only path I can see that allows for any of those freedoms. And it also allows for you to actually rediscover yourself and realize what is it that you want to do with your life. I think we've forgotten that along the path of just going through the motions of being part of that machine. And I think that breaking away from that in a very sharp way and going from an urban to a rural life really helps you confront yourself and ask those important questions, which can be reinvigorating and very positive. Even if it involves painful experiences, the outcome is ultimately good. So, yeah.
Yanya, totally agree with that. And we've had, well, from April to contemplate a lot of these things. The movie part is always shitty, but once the place is looking up and you can actually invite people, it starts getting quite nice. We've got an upstairs bedroom, and we have visitors relatively in good intervals. So it's quite interesting. Going back to that, yes, safety is a concern. I won't lie. It is a risk you take. Some areas, so for instance, our area, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, in this video, is actually has very good security and no reported crime in the general area. So we actually, you have to do your homework on that. You have to look at how many people are there except for the farms in the area? Are there big factories? Are there mines? The mines are a big problem because once the mines go out of business, you've got hundreds of people that are jobless, and that usually correlates with the high crime rate. So you have to be very cognizant of that. And then everyone needs to be armed. Like, I cannot just get a gun and tell you, no, I'll protect you. That's bullshit. She needs to get a gun. I need to get a gun. If you have children and they can handle a gun, you take them gun training and you have some spare guns to spare. That's how it works. It is the Wild West. So what I would recommend, if you can, and you are at a space where you can stay, have multiple people in a relative close proximity. So you get a plot of land and you build 3 or 4 houses with friends or family. Be very cautious of family. But if you've got good family and get along well, that's great. Then you can actually have a community of armed people, dogs, beams, lots of security systems in place to actually keep everyone up to the ball, and then also have the systems in place to actually respond, because you don't want to rely on the police. You're your first responder, as Baratas always says. So that's always true. Okay, so the tiny houses, as I mentioned earlier, I want to actually get Blockhouse on the show. They do these prefab houses that are amazingly well built, fully furbished. They've got solar panels, water catchment built in. So they are actually quite cool. And yes, you get some that are very small, and you get ones that have 2 bedrooms and a middle living room and a kitchen. They are quite nice. So those are really cool, but they have to be built for purpose and for that area that you're living in. And they seem to be ticking all the boxes. I just need to do a bit more research. So then with the rural infrastructure, as I say, it's important as to maintain energy as then to spend it. So you can also have, for instance, like a methane tank where you actually take all your organic waste, you put it in there, it generates gas. You can actually use that gas then as methane burning gas in your kitchen and burn that. So you don't have to just buy gas. But I also recommend having gas canisters outside, because that actually works. So you're ESCOM proof in that regard, so you can still make food if the power goes out. So big fan of gas. I actually have a gas heater at my other place as well. It works very well, the modern ones. Then if you are going in a group of 3 or 4, I highly recommend crowdfunding your infrastructure. Set out what you want, set out what appliance you're going to use. With that, I also want to say it's also a great idea to actually look at the power consumption of the appliances. If you have a very durable old appliance that's very energy hungry, might be a good idea to replace it, or else you'll have to buy more electric infrastructure, like more solar panels or more wind turbines. Just depends on the setup you're going for. But going for things that are light on electricity is always a priority for me. I always look at the power usage, because then your total infrastructure cost is much lower. Those batteries are fucking expensive, not so much the other stuff. And then just to add to the blockhouses thing and the small houses, repurposing shipping containers, you can repurpose them in many ways. You can either use them as housing, you can use them as storage units. I've seen people actually using those containers and rent them out as storage units for other people in rural areas. So they actually make a business out of it. Then I've also seen storage containers being repurposed for growing food in it. So they actually have hydroponics or aeroponics in there. They've got solar panels at the top, and then they actually have a few towers growing strawberries, herbs, or any other foods that they are using throughout the year. So very innovative ways that you can get them. And sometimes these storage containers actually are free. They're just standing there and waiting to be collected. And you can actually just send a truck and get a few of them at a time. It has to be a big ass truck though. So that's also something to look at. I see we're going a bit over an hour. There's something that I just want to cover before I end this session. I don't want to go too much over an hour because it's palatable at an hour's time. So I just want to finish off with the waste management. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to go for a zero waste system. So you want to take your stuff in and put it in different bins, and you also want to see what stuff you can reuse. For instance, you can use a yogurt container as a flower pot. So if you are growing stuff, instead of going to buy pots, your initial seedlings, you can actually repurpose that as something to grow flowers or plants in. You can take many things, glass containers, and you can use them to pickle in and or ferment in. There are many things that you can actually repurpose. Now, if you cannot repurpose something, then you can obviously recycle it, and you have to put everything together in bins that are recyclable. For instance, a good way to actually use, if you have a fireplace, that ash can be thrown into your garden, adds a lot of phosphorus to your ground and work it into the ground. Again, that's using something and not seeing it as a trash and actually using it to your advantage. That's the thinking you have to have when you become self-sufficient, when you are in these rural areas, is to actually go for the zero waste. And again, you can use that as a funding mechanism to your advantage. Like I mentioned, there's no garbage trucks coming to you. This is not the rural areas where a garbage truck comes by with 600 people picking up 4 fucking bags. South Africa is funny like that. You're on your own. The stuff you really, really cannot use or repurpose, you put that in a bin or in a hole and you burn it. And that's kind of the law of the land. So, and also be cognizant what you're doing with that, right? And then obviously you get organic waste. Organic waste, if you want to start a worm farm, I'm doing vermicomposting. So I've got a bin with worms in. I put a lot of my organic waste in there. You can use chickens, you can use pigs. These chickens and pigs, like I mentioned, fulfill some functions earlier. The pigs can plow your land and clear your land if you move them accordingly. You can actually clear, and they also plow your land. Same with the chickens. They clear, they plow, they eat insects. So they also might eat a lot of the insects that you encounter in your garden. So animals have a very good purpose. And then the manure can be used for composting. So there are many ways that you can compost. You can do a compost heap, or you can do heated composting that is much more rapid and it's hot. And within a few months, you can have, maybe a month or two, you can have compost. Or you can just pile everything together and kind of leave it. But you'll have enough compost every season you start planting that you can actually use in your garden. So that's organic and non-organic waste. And that's kind of where I want to end. I think in the next session, we'll actually tackle food security, where you transform food deserts into food forests, community resilience, skills development, and a few other things. I just want to end up with Dunay and ask if she has something else to add. But before she does, I think Proudly Neanderthal, I actually created a Teams group. It's in the alpha phase, so I created a Teams group with various channels. The channels are different skill sets. So it's state-proof electricity, state-proof water, beekeeping, composting, and then I'm trying to get experts in their fields to actually join. And then people as well, as they're doing these things, they can actually ask for advice. And then also I have a bartering group as well. So people can actually barter 3 things. Obviously more with time, depends. Skills, goods, and tools. And then also obviously teaching, because skills transfer for me is a hell of a big thing that I'm very passionate about. So I want that skills transfer. I'm going to have monthly workshops running, and I'm hopefully going to have experts in, and stuff that I'm good at, I'm going to do it without the experts and maybe just get a guest on to make it a bit more dynamic. So that is the idea, to build a community around all these things. And then Dunay, I'll hand over to you.
I mean, I think the last thought I'd like to leave people with is that also in rural communities, I think there are a lot of business opportunities, because I think that even in Bethlehem, there are not that many restaurants that provide a unique and distinctive experience. And I think that when you move to these places, you realize, wow, there are actually a lot of opportunities here as an entrepreneur to actually create new experiences for people. Whereas in the city, like, it's so competitive that your likelihood of succeeding is very, very slim. But when you move to a rural community, there are very few people that are not offering that very generic kind of restaurant experience or drinking experience or outdoor experience or whatever it may be. And so there's actually a lot of room to be creative and to excel in business. And I think that for a lot of conservatives, that will actually be a big draw. And that's the kind of thing we need. We need more people who are competent and want to actually invest in the community and a way of living, rather than just, you know, something temporary that's unlikely to last in the urban spaces that we've known. So yeah, that's my last thought.
That is something very important. You see a lot of very competent people going to the rural areas, and they actually are doing incredible things. There's one specific, there are 1-2 places here that you can actually see it in Clarence specifically. It's people that have traveled the world. They start a business there. They do very well. And again, they're not just limiting themselves to local trading. They are actually trading with other people nationally, and in some cases, if it is a product or good or service, they actually trade internationally. Again, get those dollars and euros or pounds in one way or the other. So thanks everybody for tuning in. That's it from me. Like I said, next time we'll continue this conversation. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and then we'll have very specialized topics moving forward. I want to cover brewing, distilling, beekeeping, carpenting, all this stuff just to get started, how to get started, what do you need, what tools do you need, how much does it cost? And then all these fun things will happen. And as I'm doing my stuff with growing mushrooms and aeroponics and hydroponics, I'll also have little mini videos to help you get started. And like I say, keep an eye out. I will be inviting more people to the community. I actually posted a few forms, but I will be reposting them in the near future on Twitter. And then you guys can obviously have a look and join there. So everyone keep safe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers, everybody.